To address these potential risks, companies have to identify significant regional and country-specific factors. Depending on the sector, the level and scope of due diligence should vary based on risk factors including geographic location, nature and size of business relationship, presence of complex corporate structure across various jurisdictions as well. To translate this into well-known principles, and there's not going to be any sort of new due diligence principles, it's more or less what the factors are that you need to look at, requires careful identification of red flags.
Global companies face unprecedented risks and challenges in today's economy. To mitigate these legal and economic risks, companies are rapidly embracing and elevating the importance of robust ethics and compliance programs to promote positive corporate citizenship. On Corruption, Crime, and Compliance, you'll hear from industry leaders and insiders about how to create effective ethics and compliance programs that will mitigate risks and maximize financial performance. Here's your host, Michael Volkov.
Welcome. This is Michael Volkov, and here for Corruption, Crime, and Compliance. Today, we're going to talk about due diligence, cartels, and TCOs. TCOs being transnational criminal organizations. Well, companies are facing a dual challenge these days: the pressing need to unravel their supply chains and the immediate recalibration of due diligence systems to examine potential presence of cartel and transnational criminal organizations, TCOs, in both the supply chain and the distribution channels. The Justice Department has adjusted its enforcement priorities to elevate the importance of prosecuting cartels and TCOs. This initiative will involve a two-fold strategy: direct prosecution of cartel and TCO members, and indirect prosecution or strangulation of the financial facilitators or the service entities that operate closely to cartels and TCOs. In this second category is where global companies will fall. Over the last 5 years, one of the most significant compliance trends has been the understanding, oversight, and monitoring of a company's supply chain. This is not an easy task. Companies have to uncover parties in their supply chain, many of whom the company is not in direct privity. This has been termed the nth party risks by many compliance practitioners. In order to uncover these parties in a supply chain, a company has to consciously push down compliance and disclosure obligations. Years ago, companies engaged in this task with a specific focus on conflict minerals. With the new supply chain focus, companies have to ensure that their supply chains do not include forced labor, child labor, human trafficking, and other companies that are engaged in questionable activities or have questionable links to cartels and TCOs. Starting with this focus on the supply chain, companies have to add into the mix the presence of cartel or TCO-related entities, which may have indirect financial interests in companies that are tied to cartels and TCOs. Now, let's talk a little bit about what the risks look like with regard to cartels and TCO risks. Cartels and TCOs exist in regions and industry sectors where government institutions may be weak and corruption is entrenched. Adding to these risk factors are countries where illicit activities are profitable, like drug trafficking, and law enforcement is unable to constrain cartel and TCO activities. The major cartel and TCOs are involved in significant fentanyl and synthetic drug networks, particularly between China and Mexico. In Venezuela and Myanmar, organized crime activities have been lodged in government institutions. Throughout the financial systems around the globe, cryptocurrency has been and will continue to be used to transport profits among individuals and organizations, and numerous TCOs are involved in online scam centers and using trafficked labor. Cartels and TCOs exploit the financial system through money laundering activities, using legal businesses and external entities to hide their illicit profits. They also engage in bulk cash smuggling and illicit crude oil smuggling, which is another source of income. TCOs are increasing their usage on the internet, dark web, and decentralized blockchain systems to conduct their activities outside the scope of law enforcement. Cartels are largely responsible for the more than 52,000 U.S. deaths last year from synthetic opioids in the United States. A range of cyber and intelligence actors are targeting critical infrastructure, telecom, and media. Non-state groups are often enabled both directly and indirectly by state actors such as China and India as sources of precursors and equipment for drug traffickers. Some TCOs are producing and trafficking large amounts of illicit drugs and other illegal activities such as human trafficking, cyber operations, money laundering, and inciting violence. Actors ranging from designated foreign terrorist organizations, including the Islamic State of Iraq and Asham, Al-Qaeda or ISIS and Al-Qaeda, other Islamist terrorist groups, and some drug cartels, to terrorists acting alone or in small cells, are pursuing violent attacks and money laundering activities to ensure financial support. The most significant hotspots include, and we'll go through sort of regionally, some of the sort of more critical areas or countries within certain regions. First, starting with Latin America and looking at Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and even the tri-border area among Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina, Mexico is home to powerful drug cartels, Sinaloa, Jalisco, that engage in drug trafficking, smuggling, money laundering, arms trafficking, cargo theft, extortion. Colombia still plays a central role in cocaine production and illegal mining activities involving gold, diamonds, and rare earth in various regions. Venezuela resembles the closest narco-trafficking state, including the TCO cartel of the Suns. Venezuela is a major corridor for cocaine, gold smuggling, and human trafficking, and the tri-border area, which includes groups involved in arms trafficking and money laundering, even stretching to Uruguay. In West Africa, looking at Nigeria, Mali, and Guinea, this African region is a major hub for cocaine transport from Latin America to Europe. Jihadist terrorist groups have integrated into organized crime activities, especially in Mali and Burkina Faso. Nigerian syndicates operate cybercrime and fraud scams. Southeast Asia, such as Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, includes areas of significant production of methamphetamines. Chinese organizations are involved in narcotics, wildlife trafficking, and illegal casinos. Wildlife trafficking involves ivory, exotic pets, and are locations where the border controls are weak and corruption is rampant, which allows for illegal logging, transport of wildlife products, drug trafficking, and money laundering. China is a well-known hub for precursor chemicals used in synthetic drug production, and organized crime groups are involved in as cybercrime, fraud, and human trafficking as well. Fentanyl trafficking between China and Mexico and into the United States has become significant. The Eastern European region has significant presence of organized drug trafficking, human trafficking, and cybercrime activities stretching into the European Union. The Ukraine-Russia war has increased arms smuggling and black market arms sales, along with organized crime activities. The U.S. stands as the largest consumer market for narcotics and Mexican cartels, and there is a strong operational footprint for distribution of fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamine in the United States. Canada has become a money laundering hub through financial institutions, real estate, shell companies, and casinos. We think of Vancouver with regard to the real estate issue in Vancouver and corrupt money. So let's talk about due diligence now and risk factors. And cartels and TCOs, we've just discussed, have entrenched themselves in legitimate industry sectors. In recent years, cartels and TCOs have adapted to market changes and new technologies. Many cartels and TCOs are presenting themselves through shell companies, sophisticated networks of third parties, and other entities as legitimate businesses in such sectors as real estate, construction, mining, agriculture, export, import, logistics, casinos, fintech platforms, and finance. The Sinaloa cartel in Mexico operates in several quote-unquote legitimate sectors, including agriculture, mining, real estate, and logistics. The First Capital Command, PCC in Brazil, plays a significant role in drug trafficking, but has legitimate businesses in the transportation, retail, construction, and agricultural markets. In Italy, for example, organized crime in Calabria and Naples have invested in hotels, real estate, energy companies, and other legitimate businesses. In West Africa, criminal networks have infiltrated legitimate financial networks and services, especially involving cryptocurrency and remittance services. These are some significant examples. The variety of cartels and TCOs is significant. More often, these organizations conceal their involvement using corporate veils, intermediaries, and cross-border financial transactions and organizational structures. To address these potential risks, companies have to identify significant regional and country-specific factors. Depending on the sector, the level and scope of due diligence should vary based on risk factors including geographic location, nature and size of business relationship, presence of complex corporate structure across various jurisdictions as well. To translate this into well-known principles, and there's not going to be any sort of new due diligence principles, it's more or less what the factors are that you need to look at, requires careful identification of red flags. So we start with perhaps the most important factor and one that you're not going to be surprised by, which is beneficial ownership. In the cartel and TCO context, companies have to verify beneficial ownership, trace corporate ownership structures, and require documentation to confirm the natural person or persons who ultimately control or own a business. Besides complex multi-level corporate structures, companies should readily identify risks associated with nominees and trusts and unusual structures. Financial transaction monitoring, contracts and purchase orders with high-risk entities or individuals have to include access to financial records linked to the transactions. Suspicious activity should be flagged, and third-party payments have to be flagged, even more so now for follow-up and investigation. Open source investigation, screening platforms, and workflow management. If you've heard me talk about this, I've always said you need to have an automated platform that organizes and keeps good records of your due diligence function. And these kind of platforms and workflow management systems are critical to organize and mitigate cartel and TCO risks. Cartels and TCOs are relying on fake biographies, fake websites, and social media activities to try to legitimize parts of their activities. Trade data. TCO activity in trade-based money laundering activities is a significant risk. Customs and trade data may provide important insights, including customs fraud and product flows into and out of jurisdictions with low transparency and high-risk trade activities. When you look at trading data, oftentimes there's good information, for example, on the CPB website about their investigations and regulatory actions. Sanctions and watch lists. The screening of entities and individuals against sanctions and watch lists can be used as a starting point for a link analysis, meaning linking related entities and individuals that may be linked to a potential supplier or third-party distributor. Indirect ownership interests. Cartels and TCOs are developing cross-jurisdiction operations and corporate structures to disguise ownership and controlling interests. For example, a specific investment in a company in country A may be owned by a Panamanian holding company, a trust in Belize, or a Guernsey offshore entity. Aside from bizarre ownership structures such as these, the flow of funds when received by a company that has an unexplained path through Dubai, Cyprus, and other questionable financial hubs should be examined and weighed. And don't forget our traditional risk factors. When reviewing a potential or existing relationship, it's important to examine the traditional factors such as cash-intense businesses, unexplained wealth, complex ownership structures with no commercial rationale, and potential links through family, friends, business connections to other sanctioned jurisdictions. So that's a quick overview for you. This is a new area that should be adjusted in terms of your due diligence system. So please consider where the cartel and TCOs may come into your supply chain, may come into your distribution channel, and take steps to make sure that you document the absence of indirect benefits being earned through your business activities. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week for another episode of Corruption, Crime, and Compliance.
If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support the show is by subscribing on your favorite listening platform. To learn more and connect with Michael Volkov, go to volkovlaw.com.